get ready.
Hello, I am Liam Ashcroft and welcome to the first episode of This is Saturn, a new series that I'm doing where I basically look at SEGA Saturn games, whether they're shit or good, and talk over them in a British accent for 10 minutes or so. To kick things off, we've got recycled content. Before I was approached to do the series, I actually did a review of Daytona USA for the SEGA Saturn, and well, I figured, hey, why not kick the series off with that, because I am kind of proud of the review. So, without further ado, let's get on with the show. Any self-respecting arcade video game fanatic probably knows what Daytona USA is. Sega's classic arcade game is not just one of the finest in arcade races, but it's also made the most money, becoming the highest grossing arcade game of all time. In my opinion, it's not hard to see why. Daytona USA is easily my favourite racing game from Sega AM2. The arcade version anyway. We didn't actually get an arcade perfect port of this game to home consoles until 2011 on the PlayStation Network and Xbox Live Arcade. That said, there were many systems that tried beforehand. In particular, the SEGA Saturn provided us with our first home console port of Daytona USA. But was it actually any good? Well, let's find out. From the intro alone, you should already be able to spot a pretty big difference, and that is the graphics. Obviously, the Saturn is nowhere near as powerful as a Sega Model 2 board, and so obviously graphical sacrifices had to be made. The graphics look noticeably grainier, and also pop-up is a massive issue in this game. I'll talk more on it later, but even just from the intro, pop-up becomes immediately apparent. There are also quite a few options in the game. There's the arcade mode, which is the original arcade experience recreated on Sega Saturn. There's the Saturn mode, which is optimised for Sega Saturn. There's your rankings, which shows all your best times. And there's your options, which obviously lets you set different options and settings and stuff. There's game mode, difficulty, enemy level, sound mode, and sound tests and such. So the game's quite good on the options front, but what about the actual game? Well, in Daytona USA, you get a choice of two different transmissions, automatic and manual. Manual transmission lets you go faster, but you have to focus on switching gear, which normally isn't a problem, but on the Sega Saturn controller, especially with the default key config, it's extremely difficult to change gears fast enough, and so this can lead to some nasty crashes. Certainly the other key configs help with this, but regardless, it's just not as clean as it should be. Yet, for some reason I feel it's okay on the PS3 version, despite a similar controller layout. In the Saturn version in particular, I just tend to stick with automatic. It's less hassle and less mashing about on the buttons during a heated race. Arcade mode, as I said, is pretty much exactly like the arcade game. You've got a strict time limit, I find, which I feel the time limit actually kind of detracts from the experience, because it is more like you're racing the clock, whereas you should feel like you're racing the actual opponent. Saturn mode fixes this by doing away with the timer, meaning that you just get to focus on racing the opponent cars. Before I continue, I would like to note the names of the tracks. There are 3 tracks, the beginner, advanced and expert tracks, and they are called, respectively, the 3-7 Speedway, Dinosaur Canyon, and the Seaside Street Galaxy. That last one in particular is one awesome name for a racetrack. A lot of Daytona USA's problems lie in the technical side of things. The game only runs at 20 frames per second, and as I mentioned earlier, the pop-up is absolutely atrocious. Sometimes it's almost as if parts of the track just appear out of nowhere, and given this game requires a heavy amount of skill and track memorization, that's not a good thing. Saturn mode also does more than just drop the timer from arcade mode. You can also choose from several different cars in Saturn mode, all with varying stats. You unlock these cars by obviously completing races in first place, and there's actually 2 very secret cars to unlock. And let me tell you, Sega went absolutely insane when they came up with the concept for these 2 hidden cars, and I love them for it. Your eyes do not deceive you. You can unlock 2 racing horses, the UMAs, by completing every race on normal difficulty. Perhaps the greatest award for completing a game ever. Though to be brutally honest, the horses kind of suck. The grip is terrible, although they are quite decent in the acceleration area. However, similar to the green and pink cars, if memory serves me correctly, the horse can drive on grass without losing speed, which is a very nifty feature as it means you can take some rather nice shortcuts. All in all though, the horses aren't really there to be taken seriously. If anything, it's just a joke by AM2 by reusing assets from the expert stage. If you want to race as the horses but can't be bothered going through the effort of completing every level on normal difficulty, because trust me, it is quite difficult, then the code on the screen unlocks the horses right from the get-go, as well as 10 other cars. Over the course of the race, your car can crash, and if it does crash, then visible damage shows up. You can actually drive into the pit lane in order to get your car fixed up, but from what I can tell, not only does it not really have much of an effect, but it also takes a lot of time and can get you from first place down to last place very easily. Basically, the pit lane is the most useless thing in the game. It's perhaps only useful in one mode where you can set tyre wear, and I'm not even sure if that's in this version. I believe I'm getting confused with the PlayStation version now. As I mentioned earlier, gear shifting in this game can be a bit of a pain on manual transmission, but besides that, the controls for Daytona USA are an absolute dream. I've not got a steering wheel to play the game with, unfortunately, but even with the controller, it's so responsive and tight, just like the arcade game. And come on, how could I go without mentioning the game's absolutely iconic soundtrack? Takanobu Mitsuoshi's amazing score for this game is pretty much Marmite, but in my opinion it's so cheesy, but it's absolutely masterful in its composition, and although the lyrics don't really mesh well with the racing environment, it's just fun to listen to and really evokes a 90s arcade feeling. So in conclusion, is Daytona USA a good racing game? Absolutely so. The SEGA Saturn port doesn't quite do justice to the arcade version, but that's not to say it's bad. It's a good racing game on its own, but if you're looking for an arcade perfect experience, this certainly isn't for you. They did actually release an updated version of this game. You see, the history of this game in particular, this port, is that it was rushed to market due to the SEGA Saturn being released a few months ahead of schedule due to the PlayStation 1's release date being revealed. As such, the game's programming was rushed, hence pop-up glitches and stuff. and yeah, overall it wasn't as good as it could have been. So they actually released a Championship Circuit Edition for Sega Saturn. I don't own this, but from what I've heard, it was actually made by the development team behind the Sega Rally series, Sega AM3, and doesn't really handle like a Daytona game. It handles more like a Sega Rally game, which I'm not terribly enthusiastic about, but oh well, I've not played it yet. Also, perhaps worthy of notice, after I finished the original version of this review, I actually managed to pick up a Sega Arcade Racer wheel for £4 at a boot sale. Suffice to say, it's probably one of the best purchases I've ever made. If you can play Daytona USA or Sega Rally or any Sega Saturn racing game with the racing wheel, then do so, because it completely brings home the arcade experience, and I just absolutely love the thing. It's satisfying to use, all the buttons click perfectly. Just get one of these if you can. That being said, with a brilliant soundtrack, tight controls, and just being a fun, arcadey experience, I give Daytona USA an 8 out of 10. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.